Welcome to Tell Us a Story, the podcast dedicated to the stories that connect us through our shared life experiences, as well as the stories that reveal the sometimes stark differences. Only by truly listening to one another can we bridge the gaps that divide us, fostering empathy, respect, and kindness with one another. In this episode, Ivana Lopez Espinosa shares her experience of growing up undocumented in the United States. She shares the trauma of entering the United States at age 3, the struggle as a young child to understand her legal status and what that really meant in her day-to-day life. She also shares the roadblocks she encountered and the advocates that supported her through her journey. Let's listen as Ivana tells us her story.
I'm Ivana Lopez Espinosa. I was raised undocumented and spent my older years in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I was born in Córdoba, Veracruz, Mexico, and came to the United States at the age of 3. My journey to the United States wasn't a traditional journey in where I came in on a plane or my parents had visas ready because there was a job waiting for us. We came as a form of protection from our family, as well as seeking better opportunities. And at the age of 3, it really felt like my world was being ripped away from me. And my story really begins even before we came to the United States. My dad had been coming to the United States for about a year to try to save up money so he could provide better opportunities, put food on the table, make sure that I could get a good education in Mexico. And so there was about a year that I didn't see my dad. And when he came back, it was December 12th, which is a really important day because I grew up Catholic and now I'm culturally Catholic. But when he came back, I completely didn't know how to act around my father. I hadn't seen him for a year. He was a total stranger, even though he was someone that I loved dearly. My 3-year-old self couldn't bear with seeing him back again after waiting for him for so long, what felt like an eternity. So we made the decision as a family to come to the United States at that point. We don't really expect 3-year-olds to have very vivid memories, but because of the trauma and conversations I've had with my parents over time, they've helped me piece a lot of it together. But my journey crossing the border began at a bus stop in Mexico. I don't remember the city. And that was the last time I'd ever seen my grandfather on my dad's side. He was the only relative that came to say goodbye to us when we were leaving. I still have the book bag. It's a small Tigger book bag. And then my mom also had like a child's suitcase, a child's ladybug suitcase. We couldn't really bring anything because we were crossing the border with someone. The next thing I remember, everything is dark. We're in the back of a truck. I'm on top of my mom, just laying there trying to be quiet. We were stopped by immigration once and I was separated from my parents. And I remember getting taken from them and seeing my dad get pulled to a men's side and my mom and I got pulled to a women and children's side. And so at 3 years old, I already hadn't seen my dad for a year. So it felt like he was getting ripped away from me at the same time. And I was stuck with my mom, not in a bad way, but, I had all of this anger towards her at the age of 3 because I thought that she was the reason that my dad left because she gave him permission. And here I am sitting in front of all of these immigration officers, just feeling my life get ripped apart. And before I knew it, we were together again, trying to cross the border in this dark truck, just laying on top of my mom screaming, trying to make sense of what was happening. And that's where I developed the fear of the dark. I don't like being in dark and close spaces because it throws me back to that time when we're coming into the US. And that was terrifying because every day or every few months, I'd hear my parents talk about how we'd go back. And I so badly wanted to go back. I wanted to feel connected to my family, my extended family in Mexico, and it just never happened. It was just a dark trip the entire time. And then that wasn't my only experience with ICE. I was also in an immigration raid when we were in Kentucky for a few years, and that was also terrifying. And a lot of my PTSD has turned into nightmares. And so I have recurring nightmares where I'm in a dark space trying to walk around and I can't see anything, but I can hear things around me. I can hear nature. And while many people find that very comforting, I start panicking. I start hyperventilating. I don't like listening to Spotify, just nature noises, because it really puts me in a state of stress, even though it's a calming sound for people, but it really just puts me in a place where I don't know where I am, and that makes it really hard. When I arrived to the United States, we spent some time in Arizona and eventually ended up in Thurmont, Maryland, where I ended up going to pre-K for a few years. And this was a very interesting space for me because it was the first time, well, not the first time, but one of the first times I remember experiencing some form of racism. I would get on the bus and the bus driver would always threaten my mom that I wouldn't come back home. The next time I get on, I might not be brought back to them. And, for my parents, that was terrifying, right? And so my parents ended up going to the school district trying to petition and make sure that I was safe. And instead of the school penalizing the bus driver, what ended up happening was we were relocated to Frederick, Maryland, a place that was more diverse and also significantly more expensive. When I was in Frederick, Maryland, I was there from kindergarten to the third grade. My third grade year was a little bit chaotic. We ended up moving to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, then back to Frederick. And so there were several years of instability in my own life at that point. Frederick provided me with a lot of opportunities. I was really passionate about playing the violin when I was really young. And at that point, I had the opportunity to get a scholarship from the Frederick Community College, which my parents didn't have the money to put me in private classes, but because my music teacher saw that interest in me, she made an effort to know that there were these opportunities. And I remembered I was called into the school's office and told that I had some really good news and there was a balloon. And when I got called to the school's office, it wasn't always good. I was usually getting in trouble, or someone had said I'd done something even though that wasn't the case. But this time felt different. There was a green balloon waiting there for me. And immediately I had the chance to call my mom and tell her that I had gotten funding for private lessons. At this point, I still didn't really know I was undocumented. I felt like I belonged in a way, but I never truly felt like I was a part of the community. I knew I wasn't from the United States, and it almost seemed like everyone around me knew that I was undocumented but me. And then I remember in middle school, there was a study abroad opportunity for some students in our English class, and everyone had a letter on their desk inviting them to this trip to England, except for me. My heart sank when I realized that there wasn't a piece of paper on my desk. I didn't really know what it was. And I remember having conversations with my friends at the time. We were comparing our grades and trying to figure out what was different about my situation that I didn't have this opportunity. And none of us could figure it out, right? Because you're so young, you don't think about citizenship. And I remember coming home and I explained to my parents the situation, and you could feel the energy around us just drop. It just like, my parents are very caring and happy individuals. And at that moment, it felt like everything around us turned gray. And I could hear my parents utter you're undocumented. And I really didn't know what that meant. Hearing the words like, we no tenemos papeles, we don't have papers, wasn't ever anything I considered because I grew up around a lot of this like anti-immigrant rhetoric where people who were undocumented or immigrants were causing all of these crimes or coming to the US for all of these bad reasons. And I couldn't really understand how we were immigrants and what that meant, right? A lot of things happened that led to our move to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It was a summer tick before 8th grade. Someone in the community knew that we didn't really have the money to stay in Frederick. It was getting gentrified at the time, and so it was getting really expensive to live there. And as an immigrant, my dad wasn't really making a lot of money, and my mom was staying at home to take care of my younger brother and I. Because of this really nice community member, he opened up his home and let us live with them. I was so excited to move in 8th grade. I felt like it was an opportunity to reinvent myself, as silly as that is, I'm so young. But I remember the first day of 8th grade, I was in our gym/health class, and our health teacher at that time had us do icebreakers, and I remember the icebreaker question. I remember every part of Gettysburg so vividly. He asked us to talk and share what our biggest pet peeves were. And English is not my first language, although it seems like it is. My accent was taken away from a speech coach when we had just moved to the United States, I think in Spanish. And there's just a lot of things I don't really understand. And at that point, I really didn't know what a pet peeve was. So naturally, I let my student partner go first. And the first thing that came out of his mouth was immigrants. I hate immigrants. That was shocking for me to be in 8th grade and hear that from someone that I'm meeting for the first time. I felt every ounce of energy I had just fall to the floor, leave my body. I'm trying to figure out within 2 to 3 seconds, how am I supposed to respond? What am I supposed to say? And I think that really set the tone for what I was to expect being in Gettysburg. It almost felt like I had a sign over my head all the time, making sure that everyone knew I didn't belong. And when I transferred schools in Frederick, I was previously a part of honors classes. I was getting really good grades, and I had people advocating for me, making sure that I was academically challenged and in spaces where I could really shine. And when I moved to Gettysburg, that wasn't the case. The school district refused to put me in honors classes. It took the advocacy of my civics teacher at that time to make sure that the school could move me, because she realized how much I was overperforming and underperforming at the same time, because I had no interest in school. I started really questioning my purpose in life. If I was going to go through all of this, was it really worth living? And that's a lot to carry for an 8th grader. So for several weeks, it really was me trying to survive until I was able to get transferred out. And, I don't blame this other student, but at that same time, this other student who was a white person moved to Gettysburg at the same time. And I realized the treatment that she got, not only from the teachers, but also from the students, was just vastly different. And I built up this resentment towards this individual because I could not understand what was so different about the situation other than I was an immigrant. And how could it have been that everyone around me knew, except for me, what that meant? And so since moving to Gettysburg, it just felt like I couldn't be proud of my own identity. I couldn't be open and sharing parts of my life that I was happy about. I felt like I was always walking on eggshells, trying to figure out who could be my friends, who couldn't be my friends. And I didn't realize that a lot of what I was carrying came from CPTSD. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 18. And so this entire time, I was disassociating, depersonalizing myself from my body. I was just existing. And school was really difficult. I'd always wanted to go to college, but I didn't think I could. And that was a conversation that my parents and I had very often. And I remember in one of my AP English classes, I was so excited to take AP English. I'd heard everyone say amazing things about this teacher. And I was truly, truly trying to do everything I possibly could to make sure that I could go to a good school and get an education. Even though I didn't know what I wanted to study, I didn't even know what was an opportunity. Um, and I remember raising my hand at that point, and that teacher allowed me to ask my question. And I asked, what can I do outside of our class to make sure that I'm doing well and prepared? And she kind of brushed off my question and said, well, if you'd been listening, you would have known that you just need to study, but you and I, let's have a conversation after this, and let's go into the hallway. And I was pulled into the hallway, and this teacher looked at me and laughed and said, I should be jumping for joy for even being in the class because Mexicans don't usually take it. And if I even manage to get a 3, that should be enough. And then spent the next few minutes of that conversation comparing me to another student, he was white, about how his parents had the discipline and the money to make sure that he was going to do well, and I was in a different situation, and so I should just take what I can and then hope for the best. I was crushed. That was the first day of that class, right? I can think of like the first day of 8th grade and then the first day of that class. It just felt like everything around me was falling to pieces. I didn't have anyone advocating for me. And at that point, this was in 11th grade, everyone around me is getting excited about what college they're going to apply for and what that means for them. And I was really hoping that my guidance counselor could help and advocate on my behalf. But when I told her about my situation, thinking this is someone I could trust, her response was, go to hack because all the Mexicans end up getting a degree in nursing. And so if that's anything you want to do, those are your only options, which really closed my doors because I don't like blood. I never wanted to go into the field of medicine. So I felt alone and I didn't really know where to turn to. I didn't know who to ask. And at this point, my family was really engaged in the Center for Public Service. They were hosting like events and like weekly meetings for people who were immigrants in the community. And I was really engaged. It started because my mom was dragging me to this meetings, or it felt like she was dragging me. But I had the chance to meet a lot of college students from Gettysburg College who would come and do English classes. And as they were working with the adults, I had the chance to talk to them. And I've always been talkative. I'm just curious about the world. I want to know what's going on. And I've never had the chance to meet anyone who went to college. I got really excited about the opportunities of going somewhere where I could do things for the community. And I remained really engaged with the Painted Turtle Farm, who had a program through Casa de la Cultura, which my parents helped found. They're not the founders, but they are part of the original community that really got that up and running. There were all of these moments that I felt so happy to exist. I truly felt safe being in my community, being out in the soil and learning how to grow food and like being able to talk to my parents, in addition to having this whole other life as members of our Catholic church. But yet I still felt like a shell of myself because of everything I was experiencing in my school. I didn't feel human. I felt like a ghost. Life was just happening at me. It was an isolating feeling. And although, looking back, I might have been able to trust people who were my friends at the time, but how can you when you know that their parents are conservative, or your friends have made a mention or two of how they feel about immigrants? You can't really trust anyone. It becomes really scary sharing what's going on in your life because you don't know who you're going to make mad, and then they're going to call ICE and your parents are going to get deported, right? Like, these are all things I'd carried with me every time. Every time my dad and my mom went to work, I prayed that they would come home. If my dad was late any day, all of these negative things would go through my head. Like, did he get pulled over? Is he arrested? When will we hear from him? What does this mean? I had emergency plans from the moment I was probably 12 until today, figuring out, okay, if my parents get deported, how will I make money to support my brother and I? Who do I go to? I mean, I'm 12, right? Like, how am I supposed to make any money? I can't. And so every day was just really terrifying. It was really hard to be present and feel safe because it felt like the world was always on fire. And I was always trying to figure out my next steps. And because of everything I had heard, education was going to be a form of escape, a form of safety. And everything I had experienced, none of that seemed true at that point. Education seems so far away. And I know I had mentioned my violin earlier. When I moved to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, I did lose my scholarship. My private teacher in Frederick did everything possible to make sure that I could get funding, but because we're entering a community we didn't know, that wasn't something I could continue. And there were a lot of things within my participation in orchestra that made it really hard for me to want to continue. I have a resentment towards my violin. I hate my violin. As much as I love playing and it's an escape, I cannot bear looking at my violin because it carries all of these negative memories that I don't really wish to share at this moment, but it's such a beautiful terror that I have. So I continued playing in my church. It was a place where, at that point, religion had always been really complicated to me, but if I participated in something, then my mom wouldn't ask me questions about what the homily was or what we focused on. And so I became really engaged in playing the violin or even becoming like an altar server. And there was this amazing woman who came to the Spanish Mass one day and asked me if I'd be willing to join the children's choir for the English Masses. And I said yes, it'll give me something to do on a Sunday. And I didn't realize she worked at Gettysburg College. And I really think that it was because of her and the person who invited us into his house to live that I was able to build opportunities, but I didn't really realize that they were my advocates until much later, probably until 2 years ago. And I'm so grateful for them because this individual made sure that I was submitting my applications, gave me advice on who to talk to make sure that I knew how to write a personal letter, and made sure that I knew what it was to go to college, and really made me excited. It made me feel like I had an advocate for the first time in my life, but I didn't really realize that because I was clouded by all of these things happening in my high school. So I don't know where I'm going with this one, but I really just then opened the doors to studying and my diagnosis. And I think because I was diagnosed with CPTSD after something had happened in my undergrad, it really helped me understand like where I came from and make sense of all of these experiences, because from a young age, I was just carrying so much. In Spanish, you say tengo coraje, and I don't know how to really interpret that word other than anger, but it's not just anger. It's like this immense hatred. Like it's just this, I don't know. See, this is where you can see, like, I don't know enough about English, but just like immense anger towards the world, towards everyone around me, because I didn't ever feel like I belonged. And then I started really understanding what systems and institutions were and what it meant to be an immigrant coming into the United States when you have all of these structures set for you. I started learning about racism and like the history of the United States and really piecing all of these aspects together, right? When you're learning about this in a very theoretical way, people don't always have the opportunity to see the parallels in their everyday life. But because I carried all of this with me, the parallels were so clear with what systemic racism was and what anti-immigrant rhetoric was, and how people who may have good intentions still cause a lot of harm because of how what we say and what we do and how we walk through the world really impacts who and how we interact with the people around us. And so I think if I had not gone to Gettysburg College, studied sociology, a part of it, right? But really, it was this French teacher who was teaching this first year seminar about the world of Yelp. I don't know that I would have been interested in studying sociology. I wanted to go into computer science because it was going to give me the most money. But I didn't like computer science. It was very isolating. And so I wanted to make sure I could enter a field and a career where I felt community, and I felt like I could make a difference, but I didn't really know that that was an option. And so here I am today. My parents and I talk about what our future could potentially look like, right? I think as an undocumented person here in the United States, you're striving for citizenship. But citizenship is much more complicated than Americans really understand because there's so few pathways to citizenship. And due to an unfortunate event, I was able to apply to a U visa, which is a visa for immigrants or people who have experienced crime here in the United States. And because of that, my parents are hopefully on a path to getting a green card, which will immediately lead to citizenship. And the same for me in a way, which is quite awful that that's the case, but it's a bittersweet moment for us. But I think for my future self, I don't want to forget where I come from. Well, I want to continue being humble and making sure that I don't turn my back to my community, because that's so often something that I've seen where people will get citizenship and then turn their backs on their communities and assume an arrogance that they're better than everyone else because of the status. And I think that's something I'm conscious of really not doing, because I know the challenge of getting to where I am. There's nothing arrogant about it. There's a lot of hard work, and there's so many people out there. You know, there's undocumented immigrants that are from so many different countries, right? And we all have to work within the system where for some folks, their racial identity really prevents them from moving up because of all of the systemic injustices, right? As I go into the future, I want to continue carrying everything I've learned and continue asking questions and interrogating the world around me as it continues to change. Because what life is like today is not what it was like in the early 2000s. And it's not going to be the same in 2050, right? And all of that matters as I continue to advocate with immigrant communities and making sure I truly understand the social context of their experiences, so I can do our communities justice and not further put them through harm. I don't tie my life to my accomplishments, but because I feel like I haven't been able to do so much because of my status, I would tell my younger self that we are able to graduate not only high school, but obtain our master's at the age of 21 from the University of Michigan. I, at some point, am able to take deep breaths and feel safe and buy all the Legos that I want because I can. That I'm working towards keeping my family safe in a way that's realistic. And not just in a child's way where you have all of these emergency scenarios in your head, but I'm able to have an emergency fund that I'm still building in case anything happens. And not only that, I'm able to love the world so much so I can feel care for my community. And because of that, I'm continuing to advocate for people around me because I've experienced many things that people don't always understand, and it's given me an opportunity to use my voice and make sure that I can make a better world for all of the little Ivanas out there who might not really know what's happening, but at some point might come to understand the world around them.
Thank you for listening to Ivana's story. Please review the show notes for more information about this podcast or visit us at tellusastory.info.